Hey everybody, thanks for joining me for my AMAP Friday. Happy July 4th if you're in the US or US territory, I guess. Anywhere else, it's a holiday here. Today I'm going to be talking about, the question, somebody asked me a question about is Pilates a system? And, I think one of the things to think about is what's that definition? What's the definition of a system? Hi, Alexandra. It's when you have a number of different things that are put together to make something, right? Basically, that facilitates and makes something. That's how I look at it. We have the body systems, right? When we look at anatomy, we look at health, and we look at the body. There's the nervous system. There's the cardiovascular system, right? There's the connective tissues. So we have all these different aspects, and they all interwork together, and the body as a whole is a system. So I look at Pilates kind of similar, right? In the sense of, because if you have anything that has parts, it can be considered a system, I think, to a certain degree. And so the reformer, let's talk about the reformer, because I've seen people say the reformer system. And that's nothing that Ramana ever talked about, or as far as I know, Joe talked about, as it being its own separate system. But at the same time, because it has springs, it has wheels, it has a carriage, it has straps, it's a pulley, it has a foot bar that's movable, it has a frame that's solid. So, there's parts that are stable, there's parts that are mobile or can become mobile. They're not mobile on their own. That was one of the things Ramana always explained. That's why she said it, even though Joe used the term machine and apparatus, but both of those terms, Ramana would say, a machine would, what's the difference? The apparatus, you have to work it. The machine works you, or does the work, right? So like when you look at an automobile, you start up and it does the work and it carries you. Whereas when you look at the reformer, the only way it's going to move is if you move it, okay? So there's that aspect of it. Okay, but I also think that Happy 4th, yeah, hi Tara, Happy 4th to you as well. I'm not wearing any red, white, and blue, just my pink. Gordon, you'll like that. Okay, so enough of that. When we look at the system, yes, we changed the springs, we changed the position, we changed the foot bar. We change the handle straps, right? We do things a little differently. And that is, if you put it all together, it can be considered a system. And it's a workout. But, and it's kind of the same, right? When you look at Joe's order, and you look at Ramana's order, which she changed a little bit, the order, what's the ultimate goal? The ultimate goal is to get to that full order, that full manifestation of the exercises. But I think what my understanding is of how Ramana talked about Pilates being the system. All right, so it's it's the system, and it's all the different apparatus that make the system, not just one. So each apparatus again has they don't all have it, but the ones with springs, right? You have springs, you have what do you have on the chair? You have you have a pedal, you have a hinge, you have different things that make that particular apparatus work a certain way. So it could be, I guess, considered a system, and it's they're all considered a system in their own way, but they're not really a system for the workout, per se. You have an order and you follow it, and then if you can't, you can modify. So that makes it, but that's not the apparatus, right? So it's not like the chair itself is you change the chair. I mean, you do with the springs, but you don't change, you change the exercise. And when you change the exercise, what does it change? It changes the body, right? Because we're in gravity. Gravity's always there, it doesn't change, right? Well, if you go way high up on altitude and, way down to sea level, there is some variation, slight variation, but the majority for what our purposes and what we do with Pilates, it's pretty consistent. It's constant. It's fairly constant. Okay, let's put it that way, fairly. Nothing's ever exact. Okay, so it's fairly constant. And but if you do it at at sea level and then you go up 1,000 feet above sea level, it's not going to change, right? Maybe 10,000 might change, but that part of that's also because there's not enough oxygen, and you have to use your whole body system in a different way because of the environment. Okay, but as far as the exercises themselves, right? What do we have? We have to do what? We have to, if we can't do the exercise, we can change the springs, right? And we can change the position. We can change a number of different things. But the way Romana put it together, and my understanding from her and what the way it was with Joe, is that one of the things is, the exercises on the reformer really didn't change much. The order changed slightly, in the 40 or 50 years Joe was here in the U.S., but the exercises really didn't change that much, because if he wanted the apparatus to do a certain thing to your body, and when it was set the way it was set and done the way it was done, it for most people, right? And Romano would talk about the average, right? So, the average person that walked through the door, it would affect them. Now, again, I in anatomy I call it the 70% rule. So that's for the 70 to 80% of the people that walk through the door. But on either end of a bell curve, right, you're going to have more of extremes. So if you have somebody really short or somebody really tall, somebody really weak, somebody really strong, you're going to have variables that way as well. So that's something else to think about. But in relationship to, for most people, if you do the exercises, Joe's philosophy, and his basic principle was, do it the way I say to do it, and basically on his apparatus. This is the way he invented it. So if that's the case, that's one of the things that you want to pay attention to, is that that's not really so much the system. And one of the things that he, Joe's genius was, which he did continue to do over a period of time, was invent different apparatus to facilitate and integrate with the mat, then the reformer, and be able to do different things in different ways based on the human nature. It's like, oh well, what's the reason why people don't exercise? I don't have the space, I don't have the place, I don't have the time. Well, he addressed that he addressed that with his apparatus and how he invented it. The wall and the gym and the wall, your bed, your chair, right? So you didn't have to have a reformer necessarily. You could do all these other things. But what happened over the period of time that he was doing his work, it became more of a system, because when you had trouble doing certain exercises, whether it was the mat or the reformer, and remember, the reformer is a lot easier than the mat, because the reformer you get help. The mat's just you and gravity. With the reformer, the springs are the teacher, right? They replaced the teacher. They replaced Joe. So that's one of the things you have to think about. So that process, right, was fairly consistent. And then when he invented the new apparatus, it was like, oh, you can't, somebody has trouble there. Well, we can teach them how to do it this way on this apparatus in this different configuration in relationship to gravity and muscle work and function, right? Because the function changes slightly depending on where you are in gravity. If you think about traditional anatomy, so when somebody's teaching you traditional anatomy, what are they teaching you? Origin, insertion, innervation, but it's in relationship to the anatomical position. Well, a lot of the things that we do in Pilates is not in the anatomical position, so that origin insertion can be the opposite, depending on what exercises you're doing in relationship to gravity and function. So that's the difference. So part of what Joe's genius was his understanding of movement and function and the human body, that he was able to develop a system of exercise, of body conditioning, that would allow you to, for just about anybody who walked through the door, and again, I wasn't there, so I don't know 100%, but from my experience in the last 40 years, and from what what Romana would talk about, and what we know from what first person and other things about Joe, that most people would benefit and could change and return to life. But it wasn't doing a reformer, just the reformer for most people, right? It was mat and because the standard workout in the studio was mat and reformer, and you do the reformer, and whatever you didn't do in the reformer you could do in the mat. So a lot of the rolling exercises, those types of things, right? Because according to Joe, he started with the floor work, right, the mat work, and then there was the reformer, and then and there's a progression of where the different apparatus fits in the timeline. So he was developing his Contrology system of physical conditioning, body conditioning, and that's the system, and it's all those different apparatus together, and the knowledge of that. So this is why when I see somebody goes learn the reformer system, well it's the reformer workout for sure. And nowadays they do so many other things. They've changed the springs, they've changed the straps, they've changed the length, they've changed the foot bar, they've changed the width, all these different things. Okay, so it's not what Joe invented, it's not the way Joe did it. It may do the same, it may not. I don't know. I don't have time to go and try out everything that I see online and everything else. So and you can have that discussion where classical, contemporary, right? And people say, well, if you haven't experienced both, then you can't really talk about it. Well, how do you experience contemporary anymore? There's so much out there that people have changed. You would be spending 24 hours a day basically trying to do all the exercises, and and the only way you're going to benefit from any kind of movement is repetition over time, right? The body doesn't change with one time, right? If you only do it once a week, you get some benefit. You do it twice a week, more, 3 times a week, yes. You don't want to do it every day. Remember, every religion gives you a day off because you have to take a day off from activity, right? You have to rest. At least you're supposed to, you should, and for health reasons and mental as well. But, so the more you do it, yes. So who's got time to practice all the variables that have been created and choreographed and invented and whatever, especially now with social media, because people just make stuff up to try to get likes and hits and put it out there. So that's difficult that way, right? So, and again, when we look at, what's Joe's work? It's tried and true, right? Because it's almost 100 years since he came to the U.S., and he practiced it for decades, over 5 decades, right? Or almost, I guess it was just about 5 decades. Was it 5? No, 4. Right? He died in 60, and he came in the 20s, so it was 4 decades. But then Clara continued it, and then Romana continued it, and so we're talking close to 100 years. And when you follow that, it does quite a bit about what he said it would do for you. I'm not sure it does everything that he said, because we know that Joe also bloviated a little bit and lied a little bit and told a few mistruths in his promotion and advertising, way before there was internet where you could check things out that easily, and a lot of the writers would just go by his word. So that's something as well. So one of the things that we have to look at is that this system, the way Joe's Contrology, Joe's way works. And that's really important to understand that, because and does the other stuff work? Well, as Romana said, even the stuff if it's based on Joe, it still works pretty well. And so a lot of it does work well. It's getting farther and farther away, so I don't know if it's going to work as well. And I don't have time to look at all that. It's just when you look at Pilates being generic and anything goes Pilates, and classical being generic and anything goes classical now, right? Because it's popular, everybody jumps on the bandwagon and tries to use it and say that they do it and this and that, and it's not the same. So that's why legacy, it's important. It's very important that for legacy and that understanding, especially if the methodology is going to last, right? So when we look at a system, you can't maintain the legacy of the system that Joe developed and invented and tried out, clinically, clinical research that he was doing his version of clinical research back then. Now today you got to do all this other stuff, but during his time, it wasn't that. That's pretty much what it was. You did it on yourself, you did it on your clients, and you were doing it in the studio. You weren't in a laboratory, with all these variables modified and adjusted and looked at and everything else. And that has a lot of, there's a lot of validity in that. But at the same time, that clinical research and that clinical outcomes were important. And he had a lot of great clinical outcomes. Do we know that they were all 100%? No. Matter of fact, I'm pretty sure we know that it wasn't. And we even know that not everybody stayed. And people would come and they didn't like it at Joe's studio and they left. When we look at, other teachers' archives, and we see the things that were written, and there's comments about, well, I went to that studio and they didn't pay enough attention, or we didn't like it, so, and that happens today. It hasn't stopped, right? So it's always there. So the system, yes, Pilates is a system. Joe's Contrology, the way Mr. Pilates taught his exercises, his body conditioning system, is very much a system, and if you don't understand all the variables, you're not really teaching the system. Like that, our bodies all work together. All our anatomical systems are always working together, and they're separate, but they're connected all the time. And I look at Joe's work the same way, right? You look at the apparatus; they're connected, and they all work similar ways, and they do a lot of similar things. And if you understand how to use them all properly, you can basically change just about anybody's body at almost any way you want, almost any time, right? Because you have the ability to address their particular needs. And that, the system really allows you to do that. That's one of the things that a system allows you to do, is to address the imbalances that are always there, all the stresses and strains that are always there, and how we habituate and compensate and deal with those things, and how do we undo those habituations and those compensations based on our body systems in relationship to our environment. And Mr. Pilates figured this all out and found a way that if you follow it, it pretty much does what he said it was going to do for you. So, Pilates is a system. I don't know if I would really, talk about the different apparatus. And I see, that's happening now, right? There's just mat class. There's just reformer classes now. And so all these different things, because that's, easier. It's easier to make money, right? You don't have to, you can train, somebody in 30 exercises, put him in a room with 20 reformers, and depending on how you do it, what you do, boom, 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 over and over and over and over again all day long, right? And that's a revenue generating way of doing it. Doing a training where you have to learn over 500 exercises, and that's just not the names. That's practicing them, getting them into your body, understanding them, and integrating them, and using them as a system, and figuring that all out. That's a much more difficult thing to do, and it's not being done anymore. Or, well, I shouldn't say that. It's not being done that much in many places. We still do it. Our training program, the one that I started with Ramana, right? It uses that for the first manual. Well, now it's the second manual, second edition. But that's the thing. It's what Ramana wanted to carry on the work, and we do that training that way. And there are a few other places, but and look, we all change. No, I'm not Joe. I'm not Clara. I'm not Ramana. None of us ever will be, and we all are our own individuals. But what I see is that people are changing things just for likes, for hits, to make money, to write another book, to make a bigger book. Whatever that is, whatever the purpose is, but that's different. That's not, that's not really doing it for the system. especially the way Joe did. And did Joe have all the answers? Of course not. Nobody does. But, if you haven't integrated and learned all those things together, and you continue to practice it, does it really provide you with the outcomes that he said you would get doing his system? So if you really want to, get the benefits, you need to learn the system, and that's a process. Okay, so I think that's enough for today. I talked long enough. So it's a holiday in the U.S. If you're in the U.S., you have a great rest of your weekend and today. I will be back next week. Remember, if you have any questions that you would like me to discuss and talk about, that's what AMAP, Ask Me Anything Pilates, every Friday, well, almost every Friday at 1 o'clock p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And then I guess once it's the winter time, it's the daylight savings time. Come and join me. I've just celebrated a year. We're just been doing this for over a year now. I picked it up. I've done something similar during the pandemic, and I stopped and I started again, and I've been getting a lot of good feedback, so I'm going to continue. So if you have something, please DM me, email me, but DM me is the easiest, and I will add it to the list, and we will continue to have these discussions. So thanks for joining. A couple things. Every Tuesday at 12:30, I do my Balanceology, which is a half-hour class on training your balance, using your eyes, using your proprioception, movement, function, all sorts of things to help you improve your balance. It's the last thing we get or we gain, and it's the first thing we lose. And Pilates does a lot, but there's there is like I said, did Joe have everything? No, there are a few things that we can do for that we can, and that's what that class is about. And then at 1 o'clock, I do my arm springs, leg springs. That's based on the resistor posters. But there's also things that I add from the archives as well. So if you want a good arm and leg spring workout, join me at 1 o'clock every Tuesday. I have in July 13th, so not this weekend, next Sunday, not this Sunday, next Sunday, I will be doing the Ramana tapes, the upper back and shoulder, up in Beckett, Massachusetts at the Pilates Museum. So if you'd like to join in, there's still some slots. You can DM me, and I can send you the information, the payment information. And basically the workshop is, in the beginning when Ramana first started, she allowed me to Steve and I to tape her. She eventually stopped that, and it's not virtual because she requested that, if I was going to use these, they could only be done in a workshop live, and hands-on. I couldn't make a video and sell it like that. She didn't want that to happen, especially because it was raw, right? It wasn't professionally done, but it didn't need to be, because it was, when you do it professionally, you do a lot, you do a lot of editing and change things. It's like, hold on. I kind of equate it to like when you do a movie from a book, right? And a lot of times it's not the same, because they have to do all these things to make the movie work. Well, with this, Ramana was just there teaching, and we filmed her. So, but that's what the Ramana tapes are about. So if you want to hear how she, cued you and her stories, and especially her hands-on, which was a lot, and you want to sort of include that into your training, then come and join me. And I'm going to be doing these more and more, and I'm going to be taking them, to a lot of different places. People have been reaching out to me for that. So if that's something you're interested in, you can reach out to me for that as well. To bring, the workshops to your studio, your country, whatever. And then let's see. And again, we're Pilates at the Pillow, the 100-year anniversary of Joe and Clara in the U.S. with his system and his methodology is next year. That's the 100th anniversary. So the Pilates at the Pillow next year is going to be extremely special and unique. And so applications are open. It's for studio teachers. We're more than half full. So if you're interested, you can check out the Linktree /Sean_Gallagher. It has all the information. You can check it out and see if that's something you'd be interested in coming. A lot of great things that we'll be doing. Okay, so that's it. Thanks for joining me, and I will see you all hopefully next week. All right, thanks. Bye.